Okay, we're recording, so welcome to No Pain, No Gain. We're going to talk about that in just a second. First, thanks to our sponsors. You can see them all on the list here. It's great that we have a big community of folks that are interested in games and learning. And they've also asked that everybody identify where they are on this map with a little star pointer. So I'll go and try to guesstimate where Denver, Colorado is there. If you want to drop some points on the map, that'd be kind of cool to see where folks are. It's a beautiful day in Denver, not a cloud in the sky. It's supposed to be 90 today. It's beautiful Rocky Mountains fall weather, so I don't know what I'm doing inside, but it's going to be another one of those days of being inside. Looks like some folks there. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of get into this because I think that you'll be interested to hear, hopefully you're interested to hear kind of, my background experiences and why I want to talk about this idea of finding a place for fun and learning. And, I'll give my punchline away early. I think sometimes in the race to put games into curriculum, we forget what games are for, and that really is games are for having fun. And if they're not fun, then we might question why we've brought games into our classroom. I think I kind of answer that and give you some good ideas about how it all works. One way of thinking about this question is just to start with what I always think about is like, why teach with games? You've got all these other great tools and techniques, and why even bother to bring games into it? And it's a question that I ask kind of urgently in my professional life. I teach about games and learning. I teach teachers how to use games in their classroom. My academic background is actually a research fun. I try to figure out what makes things fun. I try to look at how you design fun things, teach students how to make fun things. And then in my professional life as an academic technology person, I'm constantly trying to help people understand the appropriate use of things like games and gamification, if there's such a thing as that. And so what I kind of discovered is that most of the time people approach this topic of why teach with games, they really think of the Mary Poppins argument, which is it's a spoonful of sugar that helps the medicine go down. Now, there's a bunch of problems with that, I think. I mean, one would sort of suggest that learning is this nasty, bitter thing that we have to swallow, which I don't agree with. There's also this idea that games somehow are a placebo that mask the learning so the learning can happen. And there's some interesting problems with that. But I think the biggest problem of all is it doesn't really stand up much to reason. So we can just test this. Let's test this theory if using games to teach is really all about just taking serious content and glossing it with some sweetness of games. And so here's my test case, right? Let's talk about a game that is near and dear to my heart because I have a background in architecture and urban planning. It's SimCity, right? SimCity's got to be the poster child for games and learning. It's this city simulator that takes this really serious topic and by turning it into a game, it just becomes so appealing. So isn't SimCity exactly the kind of thing we're talking about? Isn't SimCity the gold standard for the spoonful of sugar argument? And I would say maybe there's something else going on here. Now, at first blush, it certainly looks like SimCity is the ultimate serious game. Here's the game designer Will Wright, and Will Wright's well known for talking about having read Jay Forrester's Urban Dynamics, a very serious theoretical work in urban planning, and he kind of merged Forrester's ideas in with his game development. So you really get the sense that SimCity is a really serious game, except there's this one thing. If you played SimCity, it's the least serious kind of game in the world. I mean, just think about it. There's volcanoes in SimCity. I mean, half the fun of building your city is blowing it up. Or I like this kind of crazy robot that was in one of the versions where send rampaging robots or Godzillas into your city. And so it sort of starts to beg the question is like, if SimCity is supposed to be a serious game, why does it have these really whimsical and unserious and kind of like non-educational things embedded in them? And then if you dig deeper, and I'm going to dig just a little bit deeper for you because I think talking about and taking apart SimCity helps us understand a little bit about what a serious game or teaching with games might be. And I'll use this illustration. This is a screenshot from SimCity societies, and I love showing this to urban planning students because they think, oh yeah, it's SimCity games or city simulators. They'll teach me about how cities work, but you just look at them visually, and they got these crazy kinds of clues in there that this is the least serious thing in the world. And so you kind of look on there, I like to look at that old-time car that's driving up. For some reason, there's a Model T driving around this town, and then look at the grade it's driving. It's like a 45-degree angle. There's no road in the world that would be built like that, except maybe in San Francisco. And look at the scale of the people to the bridges. It's weird. The people are really tiny, and the bridges are gigantic, and there's this enormous number of bridges. And if you're an urban planning student trying to learn something from SimCity, you kind of look at this and you're like going, this is a toy set. This isn't a city. This looks like, something that someone just threw together. It's all out of scale. It doesn't make sense. There's too many bridges. So we kind of pretend that it's real, but it's not real. There's something going on in SimCity that's not very serious at all. And from an urban planning standpoint, if you're trying to teach something about urban planning, I would say it's even worse than that, because while SimCity tells you that you're the mayor of the town, in practice, you're really close to something else. You're really a lot more like Stalin. You're kind of a totalitarian dictator, because if you ever taught urban planning, I mean, one of the hardest things to get students to understand about cities isn't taxation or zoning. It's the public process. I mean, what makes cities complicated are people, and we've taken out all the public choice, right? I mean, people move in and out kind of with free will, but you decide to tear down a historic building in your SimCity, you just tear it down. I mean, you're not mayor, you're dictator, you're the ruler, the ultimate ruler of your city. And so in a sense, I would say that SimCity is actually closer to a different game. It's not so much a city simulator, it's probably much closer to a zoo simulator, where the inmates or the animals have a certain amount of free will, but really you control everything. And so it kind of raises this question, well, what's SimCity really about? I mean, why? It's supposed to be a serious game, a great educational tool, and here in a few minutes I'm suggesting to you that SimCity's kind of a mess. I mean, it's kind of got all these weird things wound up in it that really teach you the wrong thing about cities. But why is SimCity so popular? Well, the answer is really pretty simple. SimCity's popular because it's fun. It's fun to play SimCity. It's fun to run a city. It's fun to tear down a city. It's fun to see if you can build a mega city, or if you can make a sustainable city with public transportation and renewable energy. It's fun to run a city in the same way it's fun to run a zoo. And that people are attracted to SimCity not because it teaches them about cities. They're attracted to SimCity because it's an enjoyable experience. It's fun. And if you think I'm just making this up, I want to show you another slide. These are promotional stills from Nintendo when it launched the Nintendo Wii back in 2006. And when you look at what Nintendo was selling, and it was really particular. They use a lot of pictures of senior citizens to try to sell the Wii as a family console. When you look at the looks on these folks' faces, you don't see serious. You see fun. I mean, everybody's having fun. They're deeply engaged, and they're really, really having fun. And as educators, I think we're a little bit jealous of that engagement. We're jealous of that locked-on joy that people can have when they're playing games, and we want to bring that to our classrooms. And so we look at games and we say, how can we get our classrooms, how can we get our students to act like this? And the answer is, well, by letting them have fun. I mean, if they're having fun, they will have that kind of pleasurable engagement of fun, and games can be a way to bring fun into the classroom. But it's not so much the spoonful of sugar argument. It's that the games themselves have to be inherently attractive and fun. So you kind of buy this simple argument, which is to say the sugar in games is really fun, but that's all they are. They're candy. They're all about fun. And if there's anything else included in them, that's really kind of secondary to what they are. They are these tools, these machines for generating fun. So I think it kind of begs the question, which I hope that you have at mind, is what's fun? And I think it's a perfectly good question, because if games are fun, great, thank you, that's helpful, we knew that. What's fun? And if maybe we can understand fun a little bit better, maybe then we can think a little bit more instrumentally about how we bring games into education in such a way that we don't destroy what games are good at, which is being fun, nor do we bring games into the classroom, which really are working at odds with the kind of educational objectives that we have. So let's talk about fun, my area of interest, specialty, and research. So I got a quick and simple way of talking about fun, a kind of a little example I like to use, which I think kind of gets to the essence of what fun might be. We tend to think about the world of being built out of absolutes. It's kind of our Western rationalist tradition. So we look at these two guys and we say, well, one of these guys, the guy on the right there, he's actually a police officer, right? I mean, he's a cop. That's what he is. And the guy on the left is just dressed up like a cop. He's not a cop. So we tend to think in these binaries of is or is not, right? We say you're either a cop or you're not a cop, right? And you just kind of have to bear with me for a second because this seems like really self-evident, but it's interesting because we don't actually think this way. We think this way, but we don't. Now, I'll show you why. Because even though we've been taught to think that you're a cop or not a cop, in this sort of instance, you're a cop or a butterfly, it is two different things, there's a lot of theory that would suggest that in most cases, we actually are able to perform a maneuver which is like this. We can think about that you can be both a police officer and not be a police officer at the same time. And so you end up with this weird combination of someone who both is and is not, or something is and is not what it's supposed to seems to be. So let me kind of backtrack on this and explain this a little bit more. This actually is an idea that comes from Gregory Bateson, and he was studying play and trying to understand kind of the underpinnings of play. And he actually watched monkeys playing in a zoo, and he realized that the monkeys were biting each other, but they weren't really biting each other. He would call it the bite that wasn't a bite. It was the monkeys were biting, saying, I'm communicating and I'm biting you, but because we're playing, I mean the bite to mean a bite, but it's a bite that's not a bite. And so you start to go, oh, this is confusing if the world is built out of is or is not. But it makes sense when you look at the way play works and actually the way games work, which is to sort of see things as is and is not at the same time. So back to the police uniform. If you're actually a police officer and you put on a uniform on Halloween, you're going to work, right? I mean, that's just what you're doing. It's not fun, it's work. But if you're this guy, if you put on a policeman's uniform on Halloween, you go out and you basically pretend to be a cop. You're wearing a police officer's uniform. You're acting out as if you're a cop, but you're not a cop. So everybody kind of plays that you're a cop, but you're not a cop. You're the cop that's not a cop. Then it's fun. And this is so pervasive in the notion of play, this is not, these intersecting planes of I am what I say that I'm not, and I'm not what I say that I am, that we almost get lost sometimes, and we forget how magical it is to have these two things together at the same time. But I'll tell you, it's not a rare experience at all. It's not just, Halloween. I'm using kind of Halloween as an example. Because I would say, first of all, it's something that children internalize directly and simply. They really, really understand the idea of the is not. So a kid puts on a spacesuit, or maybe puts on moon boots and pajamas, puts on a collar on his head and sits on his bed and thinks he's in space, pretends he's in space, right? He doesn't think he's in space. He's not confused about this. If you buy him a little spaceman uniform, it makes it even more fun, but he still doesn't think he's in space. If you say it's dinner time, he doesn't immediately think, I can't get out of my spaceship, I will die from the outer space radiation. He gets it. Kids understand the is not. They thrive in that interstitial space of things that are what they're not and they're not what they are. And anyone who's been around kids knows how easily they slip and slide between these planes. And it's not just kids and Halloween. It's everywhere. I mean, I've got an architecture background, so I like to think about Disneyland. I mean, it's a great place, but here's a castle. It's not a castle. I mean, it's there, but it's not really a castle. I mean, it just looks like a castle. So it is a castle, but it's not a castle. And I always think it's great when you talk about Disneyland. People that love Disneyland talk about all these wonderful things about how fun it is. People that don't like Disneyland say it's fake. People that like Disneyland say, well, I know it's fake. That's why I like it. I mean, it's real. It's there. It's material, but it's also fake. So you can kind of see this is not concept. It's connected to play. It's really what we mean by play, that looseness between these contexts, this is not. And it's really what games do for us. They deliver this sensation of fun, and fun is that point where the is and the is not come together. That's what we mean by fun. And games are systems that deliver that feeling of fun. That's what games do. And you look back to SimCity, the reason SimCity is fun because it's a city that's not a city. It's been stripped of the things that would be no fun, you know, the grind, the difficulty. Instead, it makes it challenging and interesting. It lets you lay out cities and have control of something that you could never have control of in the real world, but it still looks kind of like a city, kind of acts like a city, and so that is not conflagration is so fascinating and engaging that, you know, we come back to it time and time again. So how do we bring this back into the classroom? How do we think about this in terms of learning? Well, I think it kind of amounts to this. On one hand, we got these games. That's the fun stuff, right? That's the, you know, in the sugars idea, that's the thing that's like really attractive. And on the other side, we've got the learning domain. I mean, it's like, well, whatever we're trying to teach, whether it's biology or reading or math or science, whatever. So we're looking at these two things, and we kind of want to shove them together some way, right? So we shove them together, and then we hope at that intersection of games and learning, something happens. And I think sometimes we do it because it's just something different. You know, there's nothing wrong with breaking up, you know, the classroom. Sometimes it's about meaning. I mean, we look at something like SimCity and say, oh, SimCity is meaningful to cities, so we can actually use these games to talk about cities. Sometimes it's like the engagements that people just staring excitedly at what they're doing. I think that can be a part of it. But I think really at the end of the day, it's like we're trying to transfer that fun, that kind of condition of the is and the is not from games into our learning. And that's kind of an interesting and perhaps in some sense problematic kind of position to be in as a teacher, because as a teacher I'm usually trying to teach you something. I'm trying to teach you something potentially objective that I want to measure. I want you to know something specific, or I want you to be able to demonstrate something particular. There's a right answer. There's a rubric that tells you a correct way of performing something. And fun is kind of talking about these intersections of is and is not. And I think that's just deeply frightening to us as teachers, because we are always pushing on the is rather than on the is not. Now there's some exceptions. I think especially in K-12, you know, role-playing still has a place, and we know the benefit of getting kids to pretend to be people in times and places doing things, but I'm not sure that we've ever really opened that up as far as we could and let kids also pretend to be great mathematicians or to be great scientists or, you know, to be great writers. Instead, we want them to be great scientists, to be great, you know, authors, instead of letting them play at being great authors or being great scientists. So when you look at games and you try to bring games into the learning domain, I think you're always trying to look at how fun can inform what you want to do. And on that point, I have a few bits of I guess, insight or advice. And a lot of this is from things that I've tried in my own classes. Now, granted, I teach at university, so I'm usually experimenting on, young adults or even older adults. I think the ideas are the same. And I'd kind of like to leave you with two real, kind of practical pieces of advice about how to bring games into your classroom. And there's a deeper science of this that really relates to the idea of identifying game mechanics and matching game mechanics to specific learning outcomes or things you want students to do. There's an approach to there, but I think that it kind of derails this focus on fun right now. So I just want to give you some general things. So here's some general ideas about how do you put games into the classroom. So let's bring this into back into the example I started with, which is SimCity. And so here I am, pretending I'm a teacher who's teaching some class where I want to teach students about cities. And I think I want to use games to teach about cities. What comes to mind? First thing. Well, of course, the first thing that comes to mind is SimCity, right? I'm like, yeah, I teach about cities. I want games, and I'm thinking of games that are about cities, and there's a number of them, but SimCity's the gold standard. So I'll teach people about games or about cities using SimCity. Well, I've already gone over some of the problems with that, because SimCity does teach some things about cities. It turns out most of the things SimCity teaches about cities are pretty easy to teach. I mean, I can, in 30 minutes, go over the basics of zoning and, the city as a system and how taxation affects commerce and housing stock. I mean, these aren't very complicated concepts. But then I have to probably spend a lot more time if I'm teaching with SimCity now, teaching people that it's civic process that's really important, and that cities really don't operate like machines. It's kind of a myth. And so I probably spend as much time unexplaining SimCity as I would benefiting from it. So what am I going to do? Do I discard games from my cool class about cities? Well, not necessarily. One thing I can do is to avoid this dilemma of what I call narrative matching, where you say, I'm teaching about cities, I need games about cities. I'm teaching about biology, I need games about biology. I'm teaching math, I need math games. That's just narrative matching, where you just kind of look at the box, so to speak, and you match it to your learning subject. Instead, I would say, look at what games are about. Look at what you do in games. And if you look at what you do in games and what you want students to be able to do, the world opens up. So let me give you an example of games that I have used effectively to teach about cities, to teach urban planning at the university. Whether you know these games or not, it's not terribly important. The shocking piece should be like, what do these games have to do with city planning? Carcassonne is an amazing German-style tile-laying game, and it talks a lot about how space is socially constructed and how people negotiate space, and how even when you're competing to try to control space, you're always forced to cooperate because all cities are based on kind of this collision of public and private and spatial demands of there's only so much space. So Carcassonne is a wonderful game, and it actually is about, in some sense, building medieval cities, but really it speaks a lot about the process of cities today. Or Blockus, and I think a lot of folks have probably seen Blockus before. It's a really fun kind of, again, tile-laying game that, again, sort of suggests something about how simple rules inform spatial organization and really can open up a great conversation about how cities get to be the way they are and how they're managed. And Flux, a game, if you've never played Flux, I say rush out and buy it today. It's a wonderful card game. They sell it all over the place these days. And it's the game of ever-changing rules, where the rules of the games constantly change, the goals of the games constantly change, the resources you have to win the game constantly change. It's really fun. Kids like it, all the way up to adults playing it in the bars. Anyone can play this game. And it's a wonderful game that really speaks to the dynamic nature of cities, of how they're kind of ever-changing. And in fact, I think one of the highlights of my career as a teacher to date was taking students out to a big site in Denver where there's a big redevelopment of our core transit center. And a former city council member explained to them all the politics and intrigue and developers and citizen groups and politics that went into trying to get this development to happen. And standing in this kind of windy, construction site with a bunch of urban planning students, I said to them, so guys, what do you think? Is this more like SimCity or more like Flux? They all kind of shook their head and they say, it's more like Flux. Yes, I've effectively used games to let them see something really hard to see about how urban processes have, something really fundamentally important about cities, through a game where you collect milk and cookies and where you collect televisions. And it's just, it was a wonderful moment of finding what the game, not narratively was about, but what the game did, what you did in the game, and how that then game to inform what I wanted them to be able to do inside of their own thinking as as young urban planners. So first thing to avoid is narrative matching. Don't think if you're a biology teacher you need biology games. There's great biology games. If they're available, use them. But you may find that games that don't appear to have anything to do with biology actually help teach really complex ideas that are hard to get people to understand about biology. Don't think if you're an English teacher that the only way to teach would be some sort of like reading or writing games. I mean, there's lots of games that actually make you think through storyline and plot and structure and character that don't really talk to you, or they don't start out by saying, hey, play me. I'm I'm a game about literature. You find the literature in the game. So you can do this over and over again. And the only trick to it is this. You as the teacher, you have to go play games. You have to play lots of games. You play games, and you find games that you find are fun, and then you have that aha moment where you say, I love this game, and this game actually speaks to my learning domain. This game actually says something about what I want to teach, and then you bring that game into your classroom, and you help students walk through that. And it's really, as a teacher, it's exciting and challenging and fun. But I think if you're having that experience, then your students also have the chance to actually have fun, and not just a spoonful of sugar, right? They have an inherently enjoyable experience of playing that then you disentangle the play experience from the game and show them how they've actually learned something that wasn't just shoved down their throat, spoonful of sugar style. So that's the first thing. Try to avoid narrative matching. The second thing I'd ask you to think about and to try to avoid, and this is, again, David the fun guy trying to say how to keep your games and learning fun, is really it's the spoonful of sugar, right? And I've taught a lot of teachers over the years, corporate trainers, K-12 teachers, higher ed teachers, and I've discovered that the biggest problem that we have as teachers trying to engage games and learning is we just haven't played enough games. So the average teacher, if they say, oh, I've used games in my classroom before, don't tell me. Jeopardy games and concentration memory matching games, right? Oh, yeah, we use it all the time. And why do we do those? Because so much of our curriculum is engaged in memorization, recall of facts, and so memory and fact recall games kind of make sense. But in a way, these are some of the most boring games in the world. I mean, trivia games are kind of fun, but they're just one class of this staggering array of types of games. So I'm not saying don't use Jeopardy and don't use concentration, but I would say that those are really the rawest of games because they're not even working on the most interesting parts of education. They're working on the didactic stuff, the memory stuff. And, I know we've got to do that, but that's by no means the most interesting work that we do. And so I would say, stay away from the spoonful of sugar. Find games that are fun. Make sure that the games that you're bringing in aren't fun just because they're fun because the alternative is worse. Find games that are just fun to play in and of themselves. And then people are playing games in and of themselves sort of organically, but I think that the learning that comes along with that is so much more powerful, so much more memorable, and potentially a lot more impactful to your learning outcomes. So what can we do with all this? Let me show you two more kind of ideas, and then I'd like to open it up for some discussion. The first is, so maybe you don't play a lot of games. Fix that. Go out and play games. Go to your local game store and buy games that look interesting. Find a friend or a family and member that is a game nerd and sit down and play games with them. Games have exploded, and I don't just mean video games. There are tons of wonderful board and card games. Go out and try stuff. One way to kind of test yourself if you're really trying hard enough is, this is a little diagram that I've kind of summarized from a book called Man, Play, and Games from a sociologist named Roger Calloy, who wrote in the 50s, and he was trying to create a rubric to kind of explain the range of human play, and he talked about this kind of dichotomous games based more on rules like chess, and then free play, which is more based on like role play, dress up kind of play, where the play itself just kind of goes on and you make the rules up as you go along. And then around this kind of rules and free play, he uses Latin terms. I just decided to get straight to the English here. Between this rule and free play thing, he says there's these four major types of play. So there's competition. And I think one mistake that we make as teachers in using games is that we immediately think games are competition, that play has to be competitive, there has to be points, there has to be a winner. And listen, there are a lot of people that love that. They love to be the first, they love to win, and they like to get the most points, and it motivates them. But there are other types of play. I mean, there are games of chance. Games of chance are a lot less popular in our culture, and they tend to be isolated more towards gambling games. But, games of chance can be fun, especially if the stakes are low. If there's something really appealing about the play of chance. There's a type of play he calls vertigo. It's probably not appropriate for a lot of classrooms, but it's the roller coaster or the swing or parachuting, any kind of fear of heights or falling. He says there's all kinds of play that's based on kind of that fear of falling or that disorientation of spinning. And so there's something to be said for that kind of play. And then there's this area of play he calls simulation that we think of as role-playing, but it's everything from role-playing games where you're playing a character to free open play where we're playing house, we're playing cowboys and Indians. And I would suggest that as you explore different types of games, it's worth trying to find games that embody different aspects of this. So games of the Vertigo type games are standing up games, moving around games, trying to quickly organize something, can kind of combine Vertigo and competition. Games of chance where, you win a prize based on some random roll of the dice or something, or a spinning of a wheel. These things can be really a fun way to play, or to play games that aren't just, Sim City or matching games. And then, of course, I think the simulation and role-playing games are very ingrained in this. We know those quite a bit. And then finally, let me show you this, and then I'll try to backtrack through some of the comments and see what other questions you have. I want to give you one more really wonderful tool. This is a tool that I use when I think about bringing games to my classroom, and it's not just the types of games, but it's like once you've found really good games, what can you do with them? And I think there's 4 different ways into games. So I have here's this game, this fun game. Like, I love playing this game. It's always important to me that that game that's in my classroom is fun, and it's fun in and of itself. If nothing else comes from that game, the people that are playing it enjoy it at some level. But then what can I do with that? Well, the common entry point is this entry point of play, right? We play the game to learn. And that's sort of like play SimCity to learn about cities, or play some of the really fun, filament games to learn about their subject matter. And I think that's great. If you can play the game and learn, that's wonderful. But there are other things you can do. Critique is an important one. So I have students play SimCity to kind of learn some things about it, but then we immediately move into a critical move where I say, think about this game. Think about where it doesn't match cities. Think about the stories and the messages that are in there. And to me, this is wonderful. This is double dipping. Not only do I get them to think really deeply about the game, which is also thinking about their subject matter, I'm actually also getting to do a little bit of media kind of self-reflection while I'm asking them to think about cities. So criticism is a great thing, is to say, maybe you're teaching a social studies class, for example, and you say, yeah, go have kids play the latest first-person shooter set in the Middle East, and then have them come into the class and talk about what are the messages in that game, what are the meanings, what do they get wrong, what's not authentic, what is authentic, and now you've created a dialogue around the game, so the play of the game is fun, but now you can actually bring in a critique of the game. And then I think there's 2 other avenues that we really don't take enough advantage of. One is game modifications, and this is really hard to do with digital media, but it's really pretty easy to do with paper-based games. Play Monopoly and have fun, and then say to kids, make Monopoly a more socially just game, or modify Monopoly to speak to history. These can be really fun exercises because they engage play, they engage critique, but they also let people make their own games through modifications. I'll use Flux a lot to say, make your own version of Flux based on something that you want to teach. And I have had students have lots of fun making their own games with pens and note cards. And so the modification of other people's games is a wonderful exercise and a way to combine play and critique with the fun of the game. And then finally, I think there's just making games, and I would say don't be afraid of this. In the world of video games, I think that we forget that you can have a lot of fun by dumping a bunch of note cards and dice and pens and paper and scissors and saying, let's make games. And especially if you stay away from, the little trail games where you just move down the trail and collect points. But have them create really interesting games that reflect things. Create a science game, create an English game, create a social studies game, create an urban planning game. I think you'll find that it unlocks creativity, but it also unlocks play. It allows people to play at being a game designer, even as they're having fun playing games. So that's kind of some advice, but it's all based around the idea that games are fun. If you can find fun games, you can do a lot with them. And how do you find fun games? You play fun games. I think that's when you play games until you find ones that you think are fun. So let me take a breath, and I'll look at the conversation here. If you have questions, go ahead and type them in because we have a few minutes that we can have a conversation. Okay, I'm going to just use in reverse. Peggy asked to share an example of a kind of a game board that isn't just a move with trail with consequences. The easiest way around that is to do card games, and because card games are really easy to make. First of all, you just write on cards, and people are kind of organically familiar with card games, and so I think card games help. They tend to be more social. You're trading, you're playing, you're competing. So I love card games as a solution to that. Really, the other way to do it is to work for modifications. So, pick a game that you think is close to your domain, pick a game that you like, and then ask the students to modify it. And even if they don't modify it, in fact, I mean, you could potentially say, whatever, pick the latest, greatest, hot Call of Duty game, and have students say, I want you to mock up, in some pictures or whatever, how you would modify Call of Duty to, talk about the subject of peace, or, do a game design just on paper for a video game that would, let you be the role of being a scientist, being a physicist who's, designing, some great new energy source. So I think that you can kind of just scaffold things. If you just say, go make a game, a lot of people make a Candyland Trail game because it just kind of seems easy and they understand that. But modification is probably the easiest path in there, or assigning really open-ended creativity projects so that they don't actually have to make something that's functional. Let's see, what else do we got here for some comments or questions? Would vertigo include fear of failure? I suppose so. I think that one mistake that we make sometimes is that, well, it's a longer story. Games tend to have a failure condition, that just kind of makes them challenging. There's some stimulation research that says, things are too easy, we stop doing them, and if they're too hard, we stop doing them. You can go Google Xerxes Dodds for this, kind of stimulation bell curve. But so games are always trying to be challenging, just challenging enough. When we play with other people, it's still kind of the same thing. But the important thing about games is to think about this idea of the consequences need to be trivial, right? Like if you play a game for points, if you play a game for your grade in the class, that's pretty high stakes. It's kind of like, it's like gambling your house. But if you just play for fun, you just kind of play for social standing, you just have to be really aware that, that it's not being taken in earnest. Because I think that's why some people don't like playing competitive games, because they take losing really personally. So the consequence of losing isn't like, nuts. It's like, I'm not as good of a person as I should be. So I think that failure is an interesting thing. You have to be careful with it, because if the failure feels too real, people will stop playing. But if there's no consequence to the game, sometimes it doesn't feel worth engaging. And then in terms of vertigo is really about, Kaloy describes it's this disorientation. It's feeling, in a sense, not safe. But it has to be safe in a safe way. Like, why is a roller coaster fun? It's the is not of I am falling to my death, but I'm not falling to my death, right? I mean, as long as you feel that terror, but you also have the feeling of not being terrified, it's fun. And that's kind of exactly how vertigo kind of works. It's just interesting that he pulls it out and points out how much play is about being disoriented. It's about being put into these circumstances that objectively are like, why would you do that to yourself? I mean, those of us like me that don't like thrill rides would be like, why would you go scare yourself on purpose? The haunted houses would be another example of kind of vertigo play, where it's like you go into a place intentionally to be frightened by people pretending to be something, because the haunted house is not the same thing. But so that's kind of what vertigo is. Let's see here. I was gonna see what else we have here, and I apologize. This little tiny screen for trying to read all these comments here. Yeah, I'd love to talk a lot about consequences, because they're important, but it's more important to remember that the reason games are fun is because they are what they're not, right? So if the consequence is real and irrevocable, it's an ugly analogy. It's like, is Russian roulette a game? It's got all the structure of a game, but the problem is it's not really a game, because the consequence is not negotiable, and so it's something like a game that's not a game. And I think as teachers, you have to be really careful not to break the game by making it not fun, by making it, you have to get so many points in this game to earn the grade. Well, now it's just a job, it's a task. It's not necessarily a game anymore. Let's see here. Kids love to change the rules of the game while they play. Absolutely, you know, that's some of that comes from that structure, you know, rules, and the other is free play. And it's important to realize that they're just a continuum. You know, that dress up and chess are connected in a continuum. I mean, they're both types of play. I mean, one, the fun of chess is that the rules are set, and so you kind of know how to go through it. The fun of dress up is that you can say, you know, I'm the mom, you're the dad, or no, I'm Uncle Jim coming from out of town with a cane. And you know, it's you kind of make the rules up as you go along. It's just different kinds of play, and some are slippery. They kind of slide back and forth, and it's really fun to watch younger kids play because they get into these conflicts sometime about what end of that spectrum are we free play? Or are we having rules? You know, are you breaking the rules? And there's another whole interesting kind of world there. If you're interested in that conversation, there's a great book called The Grasshopper by this guy Bernard Suits. But I sidetracked myself again, so. Let's see here. Yeah, you know, this idea that kids get upset when you change the rules, I think it's because you've got two different people at two different levels of play, right? You know, and that's, you know, that's some of the structure and scaffolding of bringing play into your classroom. I kind of go back to something I mentioned at the beginning, and I just want to make sure that I'm really clear about this. It's terrifying to bring play into a classroom. It's terrifying to let people have fun in your classroom because, you know, everything in education these days is so instrumental. You know, it's advancement towards specific measurable outcomes. And we know the value of that, but we also sort of recognize how hard that is on people. So it's really a challenge to sort of say, hey, I'm going to create this environment kind of controlled chaos in a sense. I mean, all games are sort of controlled chaos, even chess. It's like, here's the board, here's the pieces, but now anything can happen. Anything can happen in that frame. And so in a way, we're always trying to set the frame. We're trying to establish what's in the board and off the board, and then let it happen and not intervene too much. And that's kind of a way of thinking about the classroom, or thinking about games in the classroom. But a lot of this comes down to just understanding games. And I wish I had another 2 hours to talk about some of the ways you can really think about games, but the thing I would just leave you with is if you play a lot of games, a lot of this becomes self-evident. And if you remember that games are fun and never to bring a game into your classroom in a way that destroys the fun, you'll make good choices. So, is it important for kids to know what they are learning when they play the games? I don't think so. I think that eventually you probably need to tie it in for them, but they might wonder if you just spend a whole day of letting them play, and then they would be kind of like, well, that was awesome, why don't we do that every day? So there may be some reasons to sort of say we're playing this game for a reason, but I tend to think it was the other way around. I think if the play is authentic, if the people are really having fun, then you can talk about it later, you know. It's kind of like, I mean, think about sports fans, probably an easy way of thinking about it. You know, you watch a game and you enjoy it, maybe you're talking about it, but then it's really fun to talk about it later and to really analyze it and what if, and get really intellectual about it and kind of what did we learn from that. But it's like they don't have to happen at the same time. I think letting students play and letting them play a game, and so you've set the board, so to speak, and you know what can happen in the game, you let it happen, and talking about it afterwards, I think is a much more rich way of engaging the feelings of play into what you're trying to teach. It's kind of like, you know, like memory match. I mean, they're fun games, and they kind of help people feel excited about what they know. But I don't honestly know if you played memory match day in, day in, that people would actually ever learn anything. That they might just get better at playing those games. But I don't know. I mean, none of these are absolutes. The only absolute is make sure games are fun. So. And maybe a couple more questions or comments here, and then we can wrap this up so you have a break before the next session. Let's see here. It would be fun to ask kids what they think they're learning through the games. But yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great idea. And again, so much of this is going to depend on what your subject matter area is, and what the age of your students are, and how long you want to engage in things. I mean, and to sort of honor what some of the other speakers are doing. I mean, sometimes it's great to let kids have a 20, 30-minute session, or any student, to play a little educational game that that's relevant to chemistry in a chemistry class, because it breaks it up, and then it lets them kind of experiment and kind of play with the material. I think those are great things. It's also okay to say, I'm going to turn my entire class this semester into a massively multiplayer alternative reality game where people are knights and dukes and duchesses and kings and queens, and there's intrigue, and they're going to collect prizes, and they're going to, and all of this is going to happen in a science class. And I've got a way of, the power struggle that's happening in the kingdom is really based on achievement of science. And I mean, I think those things are good too. I mean, it's also possible to interleave the play and the education, as long as you're always honoring the game. I probably could have done the entire presentation by saying, here's 20 rotten learning games. And except the thing would be the same every time. It's like, what's wrong with this learning game? Great adherence to learning outcomes, not fun. Great adherence to learning, not fun. So you just have to ask yourself, is what I'm doing in the name of games fun? Are the students having fun? You're doing the right thing. How you weave that into curriculum is the science and the art that I think we're trying to all explore today. So. Oh, additional resources. That's a good idea. I really ought to put some of this stuff up on my website. I'll tell you this. I'll put my email address into the chat here, and I'm happy to share anything I have with you. I've been somewhat lazy about actually getting a lot of this material out of my classroom and off of my hard drive. Most of the publishing I do these days is just about fun, like the theory of fun, the aesthetics of fun, and so I have a lot of stuff about fun, but less about games and learning. So, but I'd love to carry on the conversation. I really appreciate the questions. It's a fun topic to talk about, I think, and I'll leave you. The last thing I'll leave you with is play a lot of games. If you want to teach with games, play a lot of games, and make sure that you're having fun, because I don't know how in the world you can bring a game into your class that you don't think is fun and then expect your students to find it fun. So. And with that, I'm going to stop the recording. Thank you all.